Thank you for joining us on the Gold Silver Bitcoin show, brought to you by the GoldSilverBitcoin.com store. We are more than honored to be sitting down with Andy Hoffman today, the proprietor of CryptoGoldCentral.com. Thank you so much, Andy, for joining us today.
That's a pleasure to be here. It's been a while.
5 years ago, you wrote that Bitcoin killed silver. How has that thesis played out over the last 5 years?
Well, actually, 5 years ago, I misspoke. 5 years ago, in late 2016, I was still the marketing director at Miles Franklin Precious Metals. But early in 2016, I'd been writing a blog every day for a decade plus. But early in 2016, I started to write about Bitcoin every day, try to incorporate it into what I was saying. I was investing in it and trying to make a correlation between the two, saying that both precious metals and Bitcoin could be partners, a store of asset values of the future. But as I learned more about Bitcoin, I started to become more and more into it and less enamored with precious metals, first silver and then gold. As we got into 2017, the middle of 2017, I started to sell my silver and buy Bitcoin with it. And then the summer of 2017, I actually got fired from Miles Franklin for, in no other uncertain terms, for speaking too much about Bitcoin. And that's when I started CryptoGoldCentral.com, which is a blog and consultancy talking about both precious metals and Bitcoin and crypto of all sorts. And a few months later, I'd say maybe it was December of 2017, I also very vocally sold all of my gold for Bitcoin. And since then, I have been very, very vocal. I think I probably am the first real precious metals guy to leave gold and silver, not say Bitcoin is complementary, but to permanently leave and say Bitcoin has replaced it. And I've been more and more vocal about that as the years have gone by. I think silver died long ago around that time. And I think gold is in the process right in front of our eyes of losing all of its monetary value.
Do you think that Bitcoin is the reason why gold and silver are losing their monetary value?
Yes. And the thing is that, again, I spent 15 plus years in precious metals as one of the leaders of the precious metal community. I was back in 2002 and 2003 writing for GATA, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, and writing about the gold manipulation and writing about how fiat currency is going to destroy itself, and that the only real option to protect yourself was precious metals. The thing is, back then, I think about all the arguments that I used and said, well, why would you want fiat? Precious metals they're scarcer, they're more fungible, they're outside of the system, et cetera, all those things. But when you look at when something like Bitcoin comes along, you almost laugh at it, because in reality, when you look at it, I think precious metals are less fungible than fiat currency, they're less transportable, they're as deeply entrenched in the system and reliant on third parties and government mandates and decree. And of course, you can't transport them around. They're not divisible. They're not even authenticatable unless you have proper equipment. So in the big picture, yes, it was something outside the system, which without this amazing invention of Bitcoin seemed like a good alternative because it worked so long ago. But in reality, it's a very inefficient asset, very illiquid. And frankly, if there was any real crisis of fiat currency, it wouldn't even be usable because one, governments would confiscate it. And two, what are you going to do? Walk around with gold bars and sell them to people for food? So I think Bitcoin just made it obsolete. And that's why I 5 years ago said Bitcoin would usurp gold's market cap in a relatively short amount of time. And we're at about 10% right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if within the next 2 or 3 years, gold is worth less than Bitcoin.
Did it happen all at once when you realized that silver had been demonetized, gold was being demonetized because of Bitcoin, or was it more of an aha moment?
Well, when you're in the precious metal world so deeply and you believe so much, I had all my liquid net worth in gold and silver, and it was my job. And before that, I worked for mining companies, and I was one of the leaders of talking about precious metal manipulation. So, it takes an adaptation and, changing the inertia when your whole life is based on it. But the thing is, when I had some Bitcoin. See, when you're in that business, people were coming to me as early as 2012, 13 saying, what do you think of this? And again, back then it was worth almost nothing. It was illiquid. There was no news on it. It had all kinds of issues. So I immediately dismissed it. But even as early as late 2013, I did buy some Bitcoin. I had it on Mt. Gox. I lost it. It wasn't that much, but I know I had interest that early on. And then I just watched for several years and watched a lot of people talk about and listen to what, and just watch what was going on as I did my gold job. And then suddenly in early 2016, it just dawned on me that Bitcoin could work. And that's when I started investing. And I think the process of going from, yeah, Bitcoin looks like it has a real future to, I think it's going to usurp gold, really took about a year and a half, from early 2016 until mid to late 2017. The entire metamorphosis of my change occurred. It's one of these things where it's first gradually, then suddenly. And so by the time we were at the end of 2017, it was no doubt in my mind that that gold and silver were, I mean, I'm not understating what I've been saying. I think they're done forever as monetary assets. I think they're pure industrial assets. I think countries that do own them, for the ones that actually are not lying about what they own, will be selling it for Bitcoin. I also think that you're going to see generations of baby boomers that own all of the retail gold, in passing it down to their millennial and Gen Z heirs, who are going to sell it for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, for those that are not fully into just Bitcoin. I think we're in a digital age, and that's the way the world's going.
How low could silver go?
Well, silver is going to always be an industrial metal. There's always going to be use for it, and the same for gold. And of course, they have their production costs, and the production costs will rise with the very inflation that I've been talking about for 20 years, and we all are very aware of. So it's not like it's going to zero. It's a very valuable commodity for industrial usage, and with all the inflation we have, we're going to see higher cost of production, but we're never going to see an explosion of or really any real increase in monetary demand. So I don't really expect silver or gold to go up any more than the cost of production in over the next generation.
What does this mean for silver miners and gold miners, either as businesses or in regards to their stocks?
Well, their stocks peaked in 2007. Actually, the small stocks peaked in 2007. If you look at the TSX Venture, and the big stocks peaked in early 2011, even before gold went to $2,000. It was right around the time silver reached $50. And silver reached $50, by the way, for one reason only. It was because Sprott started the PSLV Silver Trust in late 2010 and tried to corner the market, just like they have failed to do in uranium just now. And they just have, investors have been destroyed in the same way as they were with silver. In fact, it was the Sunday Night Silver Massacre in April 2017, when the government said that they captured bin Laden, which marked the end of silver as a monetary metal, in my opinion, and gold. So anyway, the small miners peaked in 2007. The big miners peaked in 2011. They've been falling ever since. I think they're completely dead as businesses and will continue to die. And the funny thing is, for anyone who says about how miners are going to do well, like the Peter Schiffs of the world, well, if you truly believe that there's going to be a fiat hyperinflation and that gold and silver are going to be go-to assets, why would the miners not be confiscated again, just like they were in the 30s? Of course they would. So I don't think there's any upside at all in precious metals miners. And there's a reason why they've been the worst performing asset class without peer for the past decade plus.
In terms of monetary history, the demonetization of silver and potentially gold or gold shortly is quite a sea change. What implication does that have financially, monetarily speaking, for the planet, or just in general for human society, in your opinion?
I think Bitcoin is, along with, say, the harnessing of electricity and the internet itself, the greatest invention of mankind in the past at least century. I think it's for once, for the first time in history, I mean, money has been the reason for all the war in history, whether it was people pillaging for gold way back when, or the great Western powers fighting each other for fiat currency dominance in the recent century or two. But fiat currency has caused wealth inequality, it has caused war, it has caused, in my opinion, most of the problems of inequality and racism and all the things we see in the world today. And this incredible invention, Bitcoin, equalizes the playing field. It's the first time we have a decentralized money where governments are powerless to impact, and the people cumulatively, not country by country, but the people cumulatively of the world can cumulatively support and maintain the network. And so I think for humanity, it's one of the greatest inventions of all time. And it's only going to grow more virally. If I assume if we have a call a year from now, let alone 5 years from now, we could be on a full Bitcoin standard. And I also think that as much as I lean toward the maximalist arena, especially when it comes to the monetary aspects, I think crypto in general is going to replace all legacy assets. I think stocks and bonds are archaic fiat currencies, and I think you're going to see a new world where digital assets rule everything, and Bitcoin is the primary monetary asset.
Could Bitcoin become a world reserve currency, much like gold had been, or gold and silver had been in certain societies?
Well, again, way back when, there wasn't even really a world economy. There was separate economies. There was no real travel, transportation, communications to speak of, certainly compared to where we are now, where it's just one world all the time. So even when gold was, quote, a reserve currency, it really was just a universal store of value that was inefficient, but it did serve a purpose of maintaining value, especially when there were no alternatives other than fiat currency. But in the case of Bitcoin, like even the dollar, it's a misnomer that it's a world reserve currency because it's not used in a lot of places. And there are currency wars going on around the world regarding dollars and all kinds of other fiat currencies as they all destroy themselves serially. But yes, the dollar was as close as we got to a world reserve currency, but that pales in comparison to the potential of Bitcoin, where Bitcoin can literally be used fungibly by every citizen on Earth. And I believe that that's the direction the world is headed over the next decade.
I've pulled up some articles about why Bitcoin has zero value, essentially. So these are like gold bugs that are writing about Bitcoin, and what this one gentleman said. His name is David.
Peter Schiff.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to him next,
Okay.
but it's David Lewin Smith, and he writes that gold is physical, Bitcoin is not. Gold has 3,000 years of human adoration. Bitcoin, 3 years. Gold will have value in a systemic crisis. Bitcoin will be worthless. Gold is a central bank currency. Bitcoin is not and never will be. This is why Bitcoin has almost no value compared to gold. What would you reply to a gold bug who's maintaining this line?
And I know who that guy is. First of all, he said Bitcoin 3 years. So he's saying he wrote this in 2012 or 11.
So he wrote this in 2021. I think he's referencing that Bitcoin hasn't been cemented into pop culture for much longer than 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that you could have just as easily said that was Peter Schiff writing the same things, or you could have said pretty much all of my ex-peers. I mean, I have yet to see a single person of my peers in that space who has even acknowledged Bitcoin as a significant asset, let alone switch their allegiance to it. But in fact, I'm not going to rebut, but literally every single thing that person said was ridiculous, starting with that it's worthless. No, the market determines worth. Bitcoin is worth $1.2 trillion. That is what it's worth. And as for gold, there's not a single thing that was said by that made any sense at all. It just sounds like someone who's talking their book. They got a gold business. They got all their assets in gold. They refuse to see what the future is and what the president is. And by the way, to say it's not a central bank currency, well, maybe they should look at El Salvador, in which it is made legal tender, and it is a central bank currency. And I'll bet you a year from now, there'll probably be a dozen countries that are saying the same thing.
And then Mark Cuban and Peter Schiff got into it a little bit on Twitter, where everyone gets into everything, it seems. And Peter Schiff wrote in March 2021, congratulations Congratulations to those who bought Bitcoin early, pumped up the price, and who've been dumping into the hype. You've succeeded in getting Wall Street to buy into the mania. When I first learned about Bitcoin, I didn't think smart investors would be dumb enough to buy. I was wrong.
You know what? Can we not talk about what this jackass is saying? I mean, he literally, I followed his career for 15 plus years, 20 years, because I was in the precious metal community. And I knew him very well. I've watched everything he's done. And he's a plague on his own business. And it's disgusting to listen to this guy who, frankly, I think is more interested in getting Twitter followers by saying outrageously stupid things, because Twitter will award you followers for doing that. Because anyone who's listened to his advice has lost massive amounts of money. And all of his arguments are the most insanely stupid things ever. It's almost like he's alive to be mocked, let alone by his own son, who's a huge Bitcoiner and constantly mocks him while he tells the world his son is stupid. That's what I have to say.
Yeah. And Mark Cuban replies to him, gold is hyped as much as Bitcoin. Do we really need gold jewelry? Gold can make you a ring. Bitcoin and other technologies can make you a banker, allow friction-free exchange of value, and are extensible into an unlimited range of biz and personal applications.
Yeah, well, I don't know why we listen to any of these guys. Mark Cuban just a year ago said that he'd rather have bananas than Bitcoin. At least he was smart enough to mend his ways and buy Bitcoin. And I think he owns some of the other cryptos too. I mean, he's actually been scammed in cryptos, but I assume he's made a huge amount as well, because whether he believes that or not, he's adapted and realizes we're in a digital age. Whereas Peter Schiff is just he's just around to try to save his business. All he's doing is writing a terrible legacy and making it worse.
In my experience, I think that we've seen what would have been particularly younger demand sapped from silver into Bitcoin. So I think that a lot of the energy that was in the gold and silver industry from 2009 to 2012, let's say, as silver rose from approximately $9 or maybe a little less if you extend the timeline back a little bit, up to 49 plus dollars, left for the energy of that time left and is now completely in Bitcoin. So if you go to like a silver conference, for instance, a lot of that young energy that used to be there, who were curious about central banks, who were curious about inflationary monetary policy, suspicious of the fiat standard, were in silver and gold and openly talking about it. And today, when you go to a silver conference, most of the discussion revolves around industrial demand. Actually, it involves the demand of silver for solar panels or green energy use cases. And the discussion really isn't a monetary discussion, even though I think most of the people at these conferences would maintain that silver remains a monetary metal. When you go into the Bitcoin industry, a lot of that discussion that had 10 plus years ago been so noticeable in the silver investment community remains in the Bitcoin industry. So Bitcoin 2021, I'm not sure if you were there. However, it was a 12,000 person conference. The only topic was Bitcoin, but also central banks, debt, financial choice. Ron Paul, longtime gold bug, silver bug, gave the keynote on the first morning of the conference. I felt like I was actually at a gold and silver conference circa 2012. And it made me actually realize that there's so much overlap between the ideologies of gold bugs and silver bugs and Bitcoiners. And in fact, that Bitcoiners are even almost a industry separate of the rest of crypto. I think that's a different topic, but I do see the overlap between the gold bugs and Bitcoiners, even if they don't notice that yet. But I think more acutely that a lot of the individuals who would have otherwise been silver bugs today are actually Bitcoiners now.
Well, I'm going to take a different take at that, because I've been at many more silver conferences than just about anyone you know. I was at silver conferences going all the way back to 2005 up until I left the business in 2017. And I never saw anything youthful at any of those conferences. And again, I worked first in the mining business for 5 years and then as the marketing director of a bullion dealer from 2011 to 17. I would say when I was at Miles Franklin, the average age of our clients were probably in their 60s. And when I went to those conferences, which are mostly completely dead, there'd be absolutely no one there. The average age was probably people in their 60s. Yes, there was a youth movement per se. I mean, there were definitely a handful of people that were worried about fiat currency and looking for alternatives, but it really was not. There really wasn't a lot of education or understanding in youth about the precious metals. Even in the older people, I think it was really just a small group of quote gold bugs that focused on it because they were so completely focused on the precious metal brainwashing they had had. The thing is that after the 2008 financial crisis, when everyone saw the beginnings of the destruction of fiat currency, and that's of course when Bitcoin came around, and now you had this whole COVID pandemic, you see an explosion of youth into this space, and not only for Bitcoin for the monetary value, but because of the digital age explosion. So there's so much brain power, even from Wall Street, that's going into the space right now. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. I would expect Bitcoin 2022 will probably have 20,000 people. It'll probably look like the PDAC mining conference in Toronto looked like back in 2011. There's just that much energy going into the space. And I really do think it's the kind of thing, if you want to cling to the past and pretend that we're in an age where physical is more important than digital, okay, you're welcome to do it, but you're on the wrong side of history. Bitcoin is going to be the world reserve currency, and at the same time, you're going to see an absolute explosion of interest and technology and advancement in the world based on the advancement of digital assets.
When you were at Miles Franklin, what were some of the questions you would receive from people about Bitcoin, and how long back did that interest go?
It was very small. I mean, the thing is, because of my position there, people would come to me and ask me about it, which forced me to look into it. And I think early on I dismissed it. Then again, it was worth it had like a $2 million market cap, but it didn't take long for me to recognize its potential. And as I moved along, more and more people talked about it, but it was really me, myself, that made this realization, because there was very, very little Bitcoin community until really 2017, after the first big bubble, when people started coming to the space. And it really didn't even become a big thing until last year, in my opinion, where it's going viral globally. So I didn't hear much from people about Bitcoin because, frankly, it was too small to matter. But right now, I think it's it and the whole digital space is just becoming the main talk of the financial world.
Do the parallels between Bitcoin mining and its model on gold mining presumably appeal to you as somebody who was interested in gold at that time? Did that help you kind of take a look and start understanding what Bitcoin was based on, namely the processing power of basically supercomputers?
Well, of course, gold mining and Bitcoin mining are two different things. I don't even know if the word mining is appropriate for Bitcoin. There's just no real word, just like Bitcoin there's no better word for it, but because it's something that's so different. No, I mean, my interest in gold mining, in fact, I got into the precious metal space. It was in 2002 when I started buying mining stocks for the leverage, the price. It was a really good time until about 2006 and 7, when the stocks peaked. But I just thought there was that gold and silver still had that potential to recapture their glory. So you look back at what the precious metal miners did in the 1970s and early 1980s before the big crash, the Hunt brothers crash and the big bear market. And so I just spent a lot of time as an equity guy. I mean, I worked on Wall Street before then. I was CFA, I was an analyst at Salomon Smith Barney. And so I was very focused on the leverage of mining stocks. But then, over time, I recognized after working in the space and owning them for a long time that it's a horrible, horrible business. Most miners go bankrupt. It's extremely expensive to do, extremely risky, political risks, costs, environmental risks, all kinds of things that I learned on the fly. And then, of course, when Bitcoin started to take hold and the multiples of the miners have collapsed. Now, when you look at Bitcoin mining now per se, the Bitcoin mining is one of the most environmentally friendly things that's going on in the world right now, because it's mostly renewable energy.
Ideologically speaking, what parallels have you seen in gold, or what ideological facets of the Bitcoin movement have drew you in further?
Well, I felt that, as someone who's been kind of an insider into the sound money game for a long, long time. I mean, it's been the basis of my career since I started buying precious metal stocks in 2002 and joining GATA in 2003 or 4. So I've been really focused on the damage that fiat currency does and governments do by using it for a long, long time. So, but when it came to Bitcoin, so obviously it's one of these things where they say you come for the profits and then you stay for the philosophy. It was clear to me particularly in early 2016, that this was going to be something really significant. I didn't know how significant. I really believed it could be the world reserve currency, but I knew it had a lot of obstacles to get through. But I also hoped that aside from the fact that it could go up in value, that it could finally break this horrible system that has caused so much death and destruction for centuries. So the philosophy of Bitcoin is as powerful as anything I've ever encountered. The Bitcoin community is probably got tens, if not hundreds of millions of people in it already. And I sense it'll be in the billions not too far from now, because the world is cumulatively recognizing the damage that governments can do. And no better situation, there's been no better highlight of the damage governments do, both socially, politically, and financially, than the COVID situation, where I think it's becoming clear that the world needs to move on from this centralized system of monetary and political destruction.
This was one of the,
as they say, Bitcoin fixes this.
How does Bitcoin fix this? Because I know there's a lot of optimism for basically a whole new world based on Bitcoin. Last time we spoke was March 22nd, 2020, which was a turning point for the world. And we've seen a continuation of the madness of March 2020, and if not a heightening thereof. So I guess like, how obvious is it getting that these centralized systems are destructive for man? And how does Bitcoin offer an alternative? And how can that alternative eat the world, if you will? Do you borrow Andreessen Horowitz, I guess, motto?
Well, politically, it's just a complete other mess. I mean, people are actually in America are outright ignoring their politicians. It's hard to believe we actually have this Biden guy is president. It's so embarrassing. A long string of embarrassing people that are running our government, from the political, from the Congress to the executive branch on down, and the inflation that they're causing, and the wealth inequality, and the horrific social mandates are absolutely just in both America and the rest of the world. It's very clear what the damage that they're doing, and it's also equally clear how fast Bitcoin is rising. I mean, back in March 2020, the price was 8,000. And today it's up 8x, it's over $1 trillion. Heck, Ethereum is worth over $500 billion. And I wouldn't be surprised if Ethereum usurps gold at some point, simply because there's that much demand for a new world where people are not listening to what governments have to tell them, particularly about money.
One of the, I guess, comments on modern monetary policies that I see in the Bitcoin technology itself is this cap of 21 million Bitcoins that will ever be mined. They are released, provided increasing demand in a deflationary manner. So there have been already released upwards of 17 million of the Bitcoins, I believe, approximately. So that leaves about 4 million more Bitcoins to be mined over early estimates the next 120 years approximately, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm curious, how important is this deflationary monetary policy, and how does it serve as a juxtaposition or contraposition to the fiat standards that people are born into?
Well, I think you just answered your own question. Actually, as for the actual supply, it's 18.7 million. It'll take 100 years to do the rest, the 2.3. But the fact is, it's actually a lot less than 18.7 million, because it's estimated that probably about 4 to 5 million have been lost, because back in the early days when there was not, well, first, a lot of people had mined it on the laptops, didn't even realize it was worth anything, or, there was not a lot of security. People forgot passwords. So there's a lot less than 18 million actually outstanding. And of course, a big percentage of that is in cold dead hands. It's never going to be moved. So it's extremely scarce. And now you're seeing not just the retail investors of the world, but the institutions and all the way up to governments like El Salvador, which is a pioneer, are starting to add it to the reserves too. So it's the most scarce real asset, significant asset of all time. And as a result of that, it's going to be bid to a lot higher values. And the more and more people that use it, the less and less the quote powers that be have over our lives. And it's just that simple. In fact, look at all the politicians that are joining right now. I fully believe that a Bitcoin, last night, a Bitcoiner became mayor of New York City. And I expect in 2024 that the next president will be a Bitcoiner. So, I mean, it's a rapid change in the world right now, and I don't think it's going to take very long.
How significant is what's gone on in El Salvador? That was announced at Bitcoin 2021 that El Salvador would be essentially creating a legal tender law in which Bitcoin would be recognized as legal tender and could be used for goods and services within that country. Since then, El Salvador has pledged to create a Bitcoin mining facility based on voltaic energy, I believe, or at least geothermal energy. And then they've also committed Bitcoins to their treasury. The president there, Bukele, who is a controversial figure, admittedly, has pledged that some of these Bitcoin profits will be used to build 20 new schools. So how significant is El Salvador's move? What does it demonstrate that IMF wouldn't help them with these purchases? And what's next on the state actor front for Bitcoin?
There's nothing controversial about Bukele. I mean, he's, as Max Kaiser said, modern day George Washington. He took the plunge, and he's a millennial, and he recognized that his is one of these many countries that have been exploited by the Western powers, mainly the United States and the IMF. And he said, we're going to go a different direction. We're going to be the pioneers. And frankly, Jack Mallers is the guy, a very young guy in his 20s, who's been the central figure of creating this transition of a country into a Bitcoin state. And it's been a huge success. And as a result, El Salvador, I mean, I remember when I was a kid back in, like 1980, they were a basket case. They had civil war. The United States was a big part of destroying it. And this little basket case country may well be one of the wealthiest countries in the Western Hemisphere for taking this path. It's already a great success. And I think it's going to pave the way, just like MicroStrategy paved the way for companies to buy Bitcoin. I think they paved the way for countries to do it, and not just buy it, but move every aspect of their country's financial transactions into the Bitcoin space.
Do you see other countries following El Salvador down this path? And how long do you think that process could possibly play out?
I just said by the end of next year, I would be surprised if there weren't 5 or 10 countries. I would be surprised if there weren't at least one big country in the next 12 to 18 months. They talked about Brazil. There's so many out there that need this. And they're all at the same time, by the way, watching their currencies just get destroyed at a more rapid pace. The people are starting to buy Bitcoin. The politicians are starting to buy Bitcoin. And eventually they all will. They're going to all capitulate. It's only a matter of how fast. And I mean, one thing that's been shocking to me, as bullish as you see the things I wrote about Bitcoin in 2016 and 17, I did not imagine that the pace of it going viral would be this quick. And of course, I don't know if it would have been if it weren't for the COVID event that caused governments to really show their hands as to how destructive they are. But the fact is, we're here now, and the genie's out of the bottle. For as much as the whole movement of the digital age has exploded in the past 18 months, I think the next 18 months are going to make the past 18 months look like nothing.
I was always very cautious in speaking with people from the years 2012 to 2020 when discussing Bitcoin. I would take the kind of Jeff Garzik tone and say that this is, and my current tone, this is and continues to be an experiment. In 2020, however, as the world made a hard turn towards essentially a digital world by decree in many ways, I saw an opportunity, an opening, and really a passing of the Rubicon in which Bitcoin was now almost beyond the experiment phase. It was now like live. It was go time. And I think we've seen that play out. I think Bitcoin fell from about $13,000 to, if I recall, approximately 10 or less $1,000, and then quickly shot up. In fact, it was one of the first commodities on the planet, if not one of the first investment vehicles to really shoot up after the COVID crash in March 2020, when President Trump announced that flights from Europe wouldn't be allowed into the United States. And I think we did see kind of a new age in which Bitcoin took a more central role on the global financial stage, the global monetary stage. And that was really defined, I think, by its turnaround, its quick turnaround in March 2020. And not that that signaled anything to me, but it was at least evidence towards where this was going. And I think the stay at home by decree, the work at home by decree opened up this new world of metaverses and digital tokens, et cetera. And Bitcoin was perhaps the biggest breadwinner, or the biggest winner in that transition.
Well, I think we're saying the same things now. I mean, Bitcoin was well on its way to becoming a big part of the world, and that was the turning point. Just like, the 2008 financial crisis is when, I wrote it back then many times, that's when the system broke, but it was not apparent yet, because that's when the government and central banks used every one of their powers of market manipulation and propaganda to buy a little extra time. But then when this crisis came around in 2020, we saw the full length of their failure. And this was at the time where Bitcoin was already coming into its own. It had been through its forking wars, and it was the hash rate was really growing. And then as a result, there was a perfect storm of timing. There's no turning back now. And, it's either fight Bitcoin and lose, or join Bitcoin and win. It's just that simple.
Let's say central banks want Bitcoin to lose. They need Bitcoin to lose. They want to destroy Bitcoin.
They can't. They've tried. It's over. They've tried. The Chinese banned Bitcoin. Had the Bitcoin miners left the country, and now we're back to the hash rate is where it was in the beginning. The price is higher. The United States is, you got all these pro Bitcoin people. We have Bitcoin ETFs. There's no central banks. It's a complete non-event. It's over. All the attempts to stop it are over and done. They won't even try anymore, let alone succeed.
So your hypothesis is essentially that the fiat currencies are bleeding out. Bitcoin is going to take their role, and we're going to have a decentralized world moving forward. Do you see any sort of turbulence on the way there? What do you think? What do you see for the next 10 years?
Well, there's always turbulence, of course. There's no straight line, but there was the first 5-6 years I was in Bitcoin. It was a lot of fun. There was a lot of things to fear. So when things came around, like let's say a ban, let's say the Chinese were banning, you wouldn't say to yourself, well, that's the end of Bitcoin, but you would say, wow, the price is going to fall and it's going to slow adoption and cause that. Now it's at the point where it's kind of like at the end of the Matrix, where Neo finally realizes that the Mr. Smith guys can't stop him, and he just kind of like shrugs them off. It's like that right now. There's no such thing as FUD anymore in Bitcoin. There's not a single thing that could stop it. There's not a single thing that I fear. It's growing virally. It's getting stronger every day. And it's one of these things where it gets to the point where being asked what could go wrong is going to be, a thing of the past, because nothing could go wrong.
You mentioned a little bit about this earlier. The Winklevoss twins claim that they see gold or Bitcoin eclipsing gold's market cap, or at least touching it, which would be approximately $500,000 per Bitcoin. That's a $10 trillion market cap for Bitcoin to match gold. Do you see Bitcoin eclipsing the gold market cap? How long do you think that will take? And how much further beyond that can we go? The Winklevoss twins argue that Bitcoin offers all sorts of different functionality beyond gold, that you can build on gold. A lot of the decentralized finance developers who are working on Bitcoin projects cite RSK, they cite Lightning, they cite some of the projects that are propping up on RSK like Sovereign and Money on Chain. And the technical minds also say that the way in which DeFi must be built on top of Bitcoin in a modularized manner, because you can't build it into Bitcoin itself.
Well, look, I mean, I wrote this 5 years ago. I mean, in fact, I couldn't 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I was at Miles Franklin. I couldn't say that. But when I started, when I started CGC in 2017, the first articles I wrote were that Bitcoin will usurp gold's market cap. I mean, that's what I said. You can go there, it's free. And then, yes, it's a $10 trillion market cap. I believe it will do in the next year or two. And I really don't think that it's going to be even difficult to say, you know, what can Bitcoin do more than gold? Gold can't do anything. Gold has, to me, it's just a simple industrial metal. And the only thing it has going for it is that it's going to be used more because just simply because for an industry, because it's not going to be used for monetary use. It's just that simple. So I don't really even compare Bitcoin to gold anymore. Gold is, to me, a dead metal. It's just an industrial metal that's going to lose any monetary value it still has, which isn't much, will be gone shortly. And as for Bitcoin, 10 trillion is nothing. I mean, the stock market is worth hundreds of trillions, and I think it's an archaic tool. Bond market is probably worth 200 trillion, and I don't think there's a use for bonds anymore. So the sky's the limit right now for what Bitcoin could do, and I think digital assets in general are going to eat up everything that's been done by the legacy world, because the legacy world, stocks, bonds worked for a while. They don't work anymore.
What do people need to know about Crypto Gold Central?
Yes, well, I mean, it was when I started out, it was a subscription-based blog. Now it's more of a consultancy for precious metals and particularly cryptocurrency. I don't really get anyone asking about precious metals anymore. I occasionally write, but mostly I'm tweeting. I also work for a crypto company called Digital Lending Capital Corp. We're just basically bringing crypto prime brokerage to legacy Wall Street. And you know, I'm always happy and willing to talk to anyone about cryptocurrency through my consultations. I think it's been very helpful to people, and I'll be around there and at Twitter for a long time.
We've had the honor of sitting down today with Andy Hoffman, the proprietor of Crypto Gold Central. Thank you so much, Andy, for sitting down with us today.
And thanks for having me again.
And thank you, everyone, for listening.